Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to CAAPLE and the More Than a Monolith podcast. I am Shayna Henry, president of CAAPLE and the host of the podcast. We're trying something new today by live streaming this at the same time that we're recording an episode, probably more than I could have taken on, but hey, why not? We're going to try our best to make it happen. We have a wonderful guest here today with us, and I'm going to talk a little bit about her in a moment. But before I do, I just wanted to remind you to please follow us on all of our platforms. If you are not a CAPL member yet, you can still check into our social media channels, and we invite you to join us this April 19th through 21st in Newport Beach at our second annual conference. If you're not checking out some of the keynotes, you can at our website. We have Attorney General Rob Bonta welcoming us. We have incredible student performers. We have three powerful keynote speakers, all female, by the way, that are going to speak to us. And we have over 25 breakout sessions. And that also includes an opportunity to do some practice interviews for career advancement. So it's really going to be wonderful. If you are here with us live, feel free to drop your name or a hello in the comments. If you are catching us on the replay, then please feel free to just let us know that you've watched when you had a moment. So, with that said, I'm going to take a moment to introduce our speaker today, our guest that we're going to be talking about, something I'm super excited about. And her name is Suman Kapur, and she is a daughter of immigrant parents. She grew up finding ways to make connections between culture and generations. As she straddled two different cultures, she began to realize that for some, being aware of differences can be alienating, but for her, this awareness was a catalyst to creating bridges and finding common ground. As a professional development consultant, Suman is dedicated to supporting individuals and organizations through conflict management and culture change initiatives with a distinct focus on the values of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Suman approaches her work with attention towards self care, compassion, empathy, collaboration, and awareness, all of which she recognizes as essential for transformation to a more just and inclusive society. Well, welcome, Suman. So glad to have you here.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. And congratulations on your second conference. That's great.
It's exciting and nerve wracking all at the
Of
same
course.
time.
Of course. But it wouldn't be great if those were not the emotions you were feeling. So you need to feel
Absolutely.
those.
Yes, we so want to make this memorable for our attendees. So a lot of love and care is being poured into it for sure.
I'm confident of that. Absolutely. But thank you for having me here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this conversation in particular. I'm going to talk about how we met, but before I do, can you share with our audience any more about you? Just who are you? What are you about?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I'm a daughter of immigrant parents, and that is really strong in my identity. So much of my parents' influences have impacted everything that I've done. I am the older sibling of two, so I've got a younger sister. Um, I'm married for 22 years now, but I've been with my spouse for over 30 years.
Mhm.
And I'll be honest, part of the reason we didn't get married earlier is because he is not Indian. And that sort of, I was scared of
Mhm.
what that meant with my parents and my family. I wasn't strong enough early on to sort of push that relationship. But we are together. My family adores him. I have two kids. I've got a son who's a freshman in college. So that has been an amazingly challenging adjustment for me. And then I've got a eighth grade daughter who is both my kids are truly the inspiration of why I do what I do and the work that I do. I'm all about family. Family always comes first. And in a nutshell, that's really who I am.
Mm. I love it. Your heart just oozed through that intro there, so thank you for that. Um, I can connect with you on so many things just in that intro alone. But the reason why we're here today is because I happened to Google this topic, and your article came up. And what I Googled was, are Indians Asian? And what came up was an article you wrote for LinkedIn. I was so connected with it. Tell us a little bit about the article and why you wrote it, and then we're going to dig into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so, as we know, May is Asian American Pacific Islander month. And last year, I did not post anything in the month of May. And I had a lot of people in my network reach out saying, "Why aren't you doing this?" And it made me realize that maybe this is something I need to address almost cathartically. Like, I needed to sit down and journal about this because I had a lot of feelings around why I wasn't sharing as much as I usually post for Black History Month or Women's International Month, all those sorts of different months that come up. And what came out of that was this article in which it it made me realize that I don't connect with the term Asian American or even just Asians in general. And I really took some journaling time and some time to sort of flush out why that's the case. You know, when we go and fill out those forms, and there's always that census form, and yes, technically I am Asian, but I don't feel it, right? When you think and you look at the continent of Asia, India is considered a subcontinent. We're not considered part of the full continent. Look at us physically. We don't look like our brothers and sisters from China, Korea, Japan. We don't look like them. Even our cuisine is very different, right? We use our spices very differently than they do. Um, and so I think a lot of that kind of got to me and made me realize that, yes, maybe by federal government standard, I am, but I don't feel Asian. Even when I've gone to a few events, I have found maybe a handful of Indians who have been there. And by that, I even mean, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, I lump us together because that really is, if you look at the history of India, those countries used to be part of India before the British came, before the partition happened. So, you know, so I sat there and I said, I needed to share this. And as I was doing some of the research, there's a comedian, Ronnie Chen, and right after the new prime minister was elected, he did a stand-up skit in which he said, Rishi he doesn't, I don't see me in him. He
Mm-hmm.
doesn't represent me. And I said, okay, so right there also, I'm not the only one who's feeling this, right? As a fellow Asian, he also says he doesn't see himself in Indians. So it just got me kind of thinking about the topic, and that's how the article kind of evolved.
Yeah, I deeply connected with it because I feel like it's been a question my whole life of what is my identity and who defines that for me,
Mm-hmm.
really. I am American born. My parents were born in Jamaica, Kingston, Jamaica, but my ancestors were born in India. So there's this convoluted concept of who I am, what I am. When I was younger, when we always, I'm sure you did too, got the question of where are you from? Where are you from? What are you? Right? My
Mm-hmm.
mom would insist that I always used to answer, I'm American first and foremost. And then when people would push on that, we would say we're East Indian. That's what we would say. And then when it came to the check off box, there would never be an Asian or a Asian Indian like there is now. I wouldn't check Asian. I would always check other, always. So now as I've grown older and people think Asian, right? So I've kind of put myself in this Asian box, but deeply inherently, are Indians really Asian? And so that's something that I'm really exploring. And so when I connected with your article, wow, it just brought up all the feels for me.
Thank you. I'm glad to know I'm not the only one. It
Mhm.
did I was concerned when I was writing that and thinking about posting it, kind of what backlash I might receive.
Mhm.
Um, and I wanted people to know this was just my perspective. But it's interesting, the comments, even private messages that I've received,
Yeah.
you and I are not the only one who feel this way,
Mhm.
right? We don't. And I like that the government or companies are starting to put Asian Indian on the as an option. I
Mhm.
haven't seen that yet.
Mm.
So, I don't know. I think from my research, it showed that it's starting in the school systems,
Mhm.
but I haven't seen it as far as corporate work or anything like that. So I've not seen that yet, but it's something that I will be pushing. I think it is so important. And interest. I don't know if you ever get this, but I have had more people ask if I'm Hispanic
Mhm.
first than they don't even think Indian, right? They don't. That's not even the first thought that comes. And so when you even think about that, think about the cuisine,
Right.
right? The Hispanic cuisine. I know so my grandparents were vegetarians. So if we went out for dinner, it was usually Mexican
Mm.
because the food was so similar, the spices, the level of spice, the way they made it, the tortillas like a roti or a chapati, right? It's so similar.
Mhm.
And so even when I looked into that, look at our map and look at the shape of India and look at the shape of South America. Before the Platonic times, I'm very confident that those two countries were together, or the continent of South America and India were one. I'm
Yeah.
very confident of that because, again, food, even if you listen to the music is so similar. The beats, the instruments, very similar to Indian music, right? And
Mhm.
so that's always been something in the back of my mind too. I remember, especially as a kid, I grew up in Queens, New York, heavy Hispanic community.
Yeah.
I remember being a youngster. I must have been 10, and we were latchkey kids. That was just how life was back then. 10 years old in the elevator, and a very sweet abuelita gets on and she starts speaking in Spanish. And I didn't understand her. And I looked and I said, I don't speak Spanish. And in very broken English, she was very angry at my parents for not teaching me Spanish.
Oh, that is so great.
Right? So it's these little stories that I was 10 and I just looked at her. I didn't know what to say back to her. And then she got off the elevator. So I didn't have to say anything to her. But I went to my mom and dad and they were like, yeah, well, did you tell her you speak Hindi and Punjabi? I said, no, I didn't because I was so taken aback.
Right. Oh my gosh, that is hilarious. Very much so. People don't usually know I'm Indian right off the bat. They're very curious about what I am, which speaks volumes to about us having to be put on a label in a box for people to make the connection. What's really been interesting is since I've been part of CAPLE, our AAPI organization, and I serve as president, people will say to me, "What's your connection there? How are you connected to it?" Well, I'm Indian, and right, you have to go into that whole explanation of it. So,
Mhm.
not only do I get it from non Asian people, but also Asian people also need that clarification of how do you connect to this broader picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a part of me that I wish we could all just not have labels.
Hmm.
I get why we have labels, but I also think labels can stifle
Yeah.
connections and relationships because they come with preconceived notions and unconscious bias.
Mm-hmm.
I've more than I can count have had people say, "Oh, you don't sound Indian. What does that even mean? Like, what does
Mm-hmm.
Indian sound like?" Right? Or the microaggressions. I don't know if you get that. I get it all the time. You mean to tell me you're not a doctor? You mean to tell
Right.
me you're not good at math? Yeah, I'm not good at math.
Horrible.
Horrible at math. Part of why I'm not a doctor.
Exactly. Oh yeah.
Right?
All the
But then
stereotypes.
all the stereotypes, all those preconceived notions, they
Yeah.
come when you place those labels on people.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I kind of get it, but I also wish we didn't have labels. That doesn't mean I'm not proud of my identity. I am extremely proud of my identity as an adult. Of course, when I was a kid, I wanted to do everything and anything to get away from being Indian, right? It was my parents would speak in Hindi or Punjabi, I'd respond in English. Um, my grandparents, I only learned most of the language I learned from my grandparents, right? And having to communicate with them. We'd go to the temple, wear traditional clothes. No, I'm going in jeans and a t-shirt. And there would be a struggle and an argument in the house. Mom cooking Indian food or dad cooking Indian food and the spices, and I'd have to shut all the bedroom doors because I didn't want
Yes.
my clothes to smell of curry,
Yes.
right? Or I would say, can you cook before I take a shower because then it's going to sit in my hair and I
Mm-hmm.
can't have that, right? And so as much as I avoided it, it wasn't until I went to college
Mm.
when I realized that I was different, right? Growing up in New York, of course, it was a different kind of different. We were all immigrants, whether you were from a Hispanic background, an Indian background, or whatever background you had. I grew up in an immigrant community, but I ended up going to a very homogeneous college.
Mm.
And it was there that my differences were really pointed out. And I vividly remember calling my mom and saying, all right, talk to me. How do I cook certain food? How do I say this? Can you send me an Indian outfit because we're going to have international night and I want to wear my salwar kameez? Send it over to me. And I started to embrace that because I realized whether I liked it or not, the world demanded an identity from me.
Mm.
They needed to hear. And rather than have them walk away with their unconscious biases or preconceived notions, I needed to embrace my identity and share the rightness of my identity with them, if that makes any sense,
Yeah.
right? I needed them to walk away with knowing that a bindi is not tattooed to your forehead,
Mm-hmm.
right? I've had people say that to me. I
Mm-hmm.
needed to correct people when they said, "You don't sound Indian." What does that mean? Right? I needed to push them for those sorts of things.
Mm.
So it goes really back to whether we like it or not, we need to create the identity that we want the world to know, right? And I'm not, as I'm talking about this, I don't want it to sound like other Asian communities are lesser than, or we don't want to be part of that community. I'm not at all saying that. I'm saying that our identities are very different.
Mm.
Our experiences are extremely different. And therefore, how can we find sort of a happy medium with that? Right? That's kind of the big thing. Because, again, in that article, I had someone reach out to me and say, she is a Chinese American, and she thought that my article was dividing the Asian community.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I said it's not. This, of course, is my perspective, and it's written in a way to say that Asia is so ginormous.
Mm-hmm.
Russia is part of Asia,
Yeah.
right? So Russia is part of Asia. How is that?
Mm-hmm.
We definitely don't look Russian. The language is definitely nothing like Russian and Hindi, Punjabi, Gujarati. Even India, look at all the languages,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
right? Even within India, there are physical differences, language differences, cultural differences just within our own country, right? And now you add countries which physically we don't look the same, right? Even religion is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Within India, within Asia. So it's a very deep rooted, challenging concept.
Yeah. I'm connecting with this whole concept of who gets to name our identity, because growing up, we were raised in a suburban area that was mostly white. And so going through the K-12 system, um, if you didn't know my skin color, I would say I probably identified as white, right? Because I pushed
Mm-hmm.
away, very much like you, pushed away the traditional cultural pieces that were really my DNA. It took one kid at school to make fun of my curry lunch that I never wanted it again. Don't ever give it to me. So much so that my son, who loves Indian food, um, asked for lunch, and I do not want to give it to him. He had to beg me for it because I did not want him to go through what I went through, and I still remember it, right? And so pushing away that
Mm-hmm.
identity, and now as an adult, I'm desperate and hungry to learn as much as I possibly can. My parents are both gone, so I don't have them anymore to talk to about this, but it's this whole concept of who gets to label me, who gets to
Mm-hmm.
put my identity on me. And I think when you get comments like that, that is your truth. You wrote your
Mm-hmm.
truth, and it should be validated.
Yeah, absolutely. But it made for great conversation, right? And
Yes.
dialogue, which again is such an important factor in everything that we do, right?
Hmm.
And it doesn't matter where you sit politically, culturally, it doesn't matter. But if we're not able to have conversations around it, we'll never learn anything about each other. And so we had really good conversation. None of it changed any of our minds, but I was able to see her perspective, right? Because
Hmm.
again, whether we like it or not, as of right now, the federal government has looped all of Asia together in one checkbox, right?
Yeah.
That's over 1 billion people in one checkbox. And so, how do we come and unite ourselves, right? How do we have these conversations? It's really interesting. Yesterday, um, a friend reached out to me and said, "Hey, so my company is doing, trying to put together stuff for AAPI month. Do you have suggestions?" So my suggestions were things like have a conversation around what's your favorite meal growing up? What's the memory connected to that? What's the favorite holiday that you celebrated as a kid with your family? And she said, "Oh, these are great ideas, but look, it looks like they already put out a questionnaire." And the questionnaire included things like, let's have a book club. Let's talk about, oh, I'm drawing a blank. The book club stood out to me really because how do you pick one book that talks about all the different parts of Asia? Right? And so, what I try to do with my suggestions is everyone can bring a part of themselves and share themselves. Oh, the other suggestion I had was create a playlist so you could hear the diverse music within the continent of Asia, right? Rather than let's pick one book to talk about Asia,
Right.
right? How is that? So when companies and ERGs are kind of working through what to do for AAPI month, think about something that's going to be all inclusive. And the way you do that is to have conversation, right? Not just let's read a book or let's eat a cuisine. That was the other recommendation. We'll bring in food, you know, how you have Japanese food, Chinese food, Korean food, Indian food, South Indian food. I mean, there's so many cuisines within Asia. Now, if your company is going to pay for 20 meals for the whole month of, May, great, good for them. But how else can we have conversation so that we can learn about the vast diversity around Asia? Have
Yeah.
panelists, right? Think about ways in which we can learn about the different parts of Asia.
Mhm. Yeah, something you also said in your article really resonated with me, and I actually did it today before our call, but you said Google courses in our higher education. So I did. I Googled Asian studies and I plugged in Stanford, Harvard, UCLA, several of them. Stanford says it's East Asian studies. They're
Mm-hmm.
very deliberate. I could not find anything about South Asians. UCLA allows you to pick different minors, but our higher education courses are even kind of pushing against this narrative of what is Asian. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, my friends.
Yeah.
um, I think, again, when you think of the term Asian, the first image that comes into your mind is not Indian,
Hmm.
right? That's the first image that does not come to your mind. Think about Asian food. Indian food is not the first thing that comes to your mind.
Hmm.
And so I think that's happening in education as well. Um, is that when you talk about Asian studies, it's either East Asian or no Asian, right? Like that is it. It's Chinese studies, it's Korean studies, it's Japanese studies, but India ends up being, if you can find it, ends up being a standalone, probably one class or maybe a touch upon, right? Think about when we were in elementary school,
Oh,
they had a sub chapter
that's
on
right.
India, right? Not
That's
even,
right.
we couldn't even get a full chapter. We got a sub
That's
chapter.
right.
It was typically the same thing, Mahatma Gandhi, the
That's right.
partition, the division, and that was it, right? Like
Exactly.
that's all that India has to offer,
Yeah.
right? We have Mahatma Gandhi that we can bring. That's
Hmm.
all that we have to offer, right? And it's like,
Right.
really? So I do think that in higher education or even just education all along, there needs to be a conscious commitment to highlighting the amazing diversity that's called India, right? Just think
Hmm.
about it. North India, South
Oh my
India,
gosh.
East, West, it's so different.
Hmm.
Climate is different, culture, language. Um, my mom and I'm not active on Instagram, but I only joined Instagram so that I could connect with my mother who joined Instagram before me, which I thought was pretty funny. But we did it so that we could share these reels, and we're in the midst of sharing reels around traditional clothing
Hmm.
and the vast difference in how a sari is worn. Punjabi women wear it differently. Women from Delhi wear it differently. Rajasthani women wear it differently. Gujarati women wear it differently. This is our national garment that, it's, you think of a sari, you think of India, but there's
Hmm.
so many different ways to wear it. And I would love if educational systems, particularly higher ed, would really focus on the amazingness that is India, right? And maybe I don't know enough about other Asian cultures, but maybe India is has met too many layers and maybe higher ed is not sure how to unpack all those layers, right? Just like this conversation, right? Like there's so many layers to this conversation that an 45 minutes, an hour conversation isn't enough,
Yeah.
right? And so maybe giving higher ed a benefit of the doubt, maybe that's part of the challenge, but that shouldn't prevent a course on India, an entire course
Yeah.
dedicated to India, because there's so much, right? Even if you just think of the Mughal Empire or you just think of the partition time. I mean, my grandparents were part of the partition. My mom was
Hmm.
an infant
Wow.
My family is from the what is now the Pakistan side of Punjab.
Mm,
So during partition, they needed to leave and come over to India because we are Hindus. And the stories,
mm,
just to
wow.
dedicate a class on those stories
Mm,
would be phenomenal,
mhm.
right? So I encourage higher ed leaders to try it,
Right.
to create a course around it, to at least start and then take feedback and improve it so that we do have, I don't want to say an equal playing field, but I'm at a loss of words right now, but so that we can at least share this diverse subcontinent of India with the world and with students who might be interested in learning about it.
Yeah, it also made me think about this charge, especially in California, the requirement of ethnic studies coming into our high schools and how courses are being developed. And it just made me really curious about our schools really zoning in on the Indian history, or is it again that broad AAPI course? And how do
Mm-hmm.
you do an AAPI course and do it well, do it with authenticity, right? So it left me with a lot of more questions and answers, but things that I'm really eager to explore. One thing I wanted to ask you too was this concept. I'm not sure you're on the East Coast, but here in California, I'm hearing it a lot. Is this intentionality of calling out Daisy, Daisy Americans, and just adding that to the AAPI piece? What are your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Desi is it's a great, so part of within the culture,
Hmm.
right? We we reach out and we say, "Are you Desi?" Right? And that's kind of like, "Oh yeah, we're together. Yeah, that's our bond. We are Desi." But if you look at the root of Desi, Desi actually is a term that came out of North India.
Hmm.
So again, another term that may not be fully inclusive of all of India, right? But it even though it came out of North India, I think it is a term that all Indians can relate to, right? And I think it's a great idea. I would encourage, as we move forward with this term, for focus groups to see how this term resonates with Indians all across the country, right? Because there might be South Indians who don't relate to that term.
Right.
I don't know the answer to that, right? Like, I don't know that because I that's part of my identity is Desi, right? Like that's just how it is. But I don't know how someone from East India would relate to that term, right? Is it an all-inclusive term? But that also then begs the question, is there really an all-inclusive term, right? Except Indian, right?
Hmm.
And then that too, I don't know if you've had to do it. I have definitely had people when I say I'm Indian ask me what tribe I belong to.
Oh, of course. I've been asked, am I a dot Indian or a feather Indian?
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I have not had that happen to me,
Hmm.
but wow.
Hmm.
I feel like you sucker punched me there. Wow.
I
Okay.
maybe I'm immune to it right now. I heard it. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so sometimes what I will say is I'm Indian from India,
Hmm.
right? So that I don't get such a comment or such a
Right.
next follow up question, right?
Hmm.
I have definitely said that, oh, my, or I'll say, um, I'm first gen uh, Indian, my family's from India, so that I just continue the sentence, right? So that there's no doubt in someone's mind or someone to then ask what tribe I belong to.
Hmm.
So I think maybe the only all inclusive term would be Indian, but then we end up with this next question, which is
Yeah.
Native American,
Hmm.
right? And it's very interesting. A really small tangent, but we have I'm in the DC, Washington D.C. area, And there is a Smithsonian museum for the Native American. I don't remember the full title, but it's a Native American museum. And my kids and I have done the tours, and I asked one of the tour leaders, who said he was of Native American heritage. So I asked him, what are your thoughts around the term Indian? And he's kind of chuckled and he said, yeah, sometimes I'm okay with it and sometimes I'm not. It just depends. That's sort of the term that was given to us. And I really want us to go back to indigenous people and take control of a term that we are putting out there.
Mm.
He's like, but it just depends on who's saying the term and whether I want to have a conversation. I said, absolutely understand that, right?
Yeah.
So even within the indigenous community, I still think the term Indian is there,
Mm-hmm.
but it's right. So that becomes the challenge too. But the term Desi, I think, is, at least from my perspective, is another identifier. And I think it's one that, if most, again, we can't speak for the billions of people in India, but if most people are comfortable with the term Desi, I think it could bring sort of that individual identity that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think at the end of the day, it's about freedom to create your own definition of who you are and not let others craft that for you. I also think there's this concept of the belonging piece, and we talked about that
Mm-hmm.
in your intro. We talk about the diversity, equity, inclusion, and all of that, but the belonging piece and finding a space where you feel connected and feel like you are part of something is really important, which I think was so great about meeting you in our first conversation offline. uh, I connected with you in so many ways and left that conversation feeling connected, belonging. You see me. I felt safe. And I think that's the most important thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. I'm glad that you felt not only a connection, but that you felt a level of safety in
Hmm.
sharing, right? Because so much of this country has its own belief of what belonging means, right? Growing up, belonging meant assimilation for me,
Hmm.
right? Yep, I see the nod there, right? Like that is belonging, is how much can we assimilate? How much can we fit into this American culture, whatever that looks like and feels like? And so I'm glad that you felt comfortable and safe sharing. But even taking that further, workplaces can manage that. And it doesn't mean just having an Asian ERG. Create an ERG that is specific to,
Yes.
right? That's what's important. Because I
Hmm.
can show up to an ERG and the challenges that my fellow Asians from other countries are having may or may not be the same struggle I have. And I'll be honest, I can relate more to the struggles of the Black and Hispanic communities than I
Hmm.
do of the other Asian communities, right?
Yes.
And that's
Hmm.
not to take away from their struggles, but it's a very different struggle, right? And that is sort of where I sit. So I feel like I'm trying to find my space, right? I'm not Black, right? So while I can relate better, I'm not Black to truly understand the struggle, but I can relate. Same with Hispanics, right? So it's like trying to put a square in a circle. Like, where do I fit? Where do I
Yes.
belong?
Hmm.
Right? And I actually had someone comment to me, why is that so important? We're Americans. This is what you should like. You should just want to be American. What does that mean?
Hmm.
Right? This country is made up of so many different backgrounds. What does it mean to be American? Right? And when I was growing up, it meant no accent, eating, chicken, mashed potatoes, and peas, right? Staying away from the curry, You
Yeah.
know, it meant not listening to the music that was on the radio and dressing in jeans and t-shirts and sneakers.
Right.
As a kid, that is what American meant to me.
Hmm.
And now as I'm older, that's not the only America that's there, right? Yeah, I wear jeans, sneakers, I eat chicken and mashed potatoes, but I like to, spice things up a little. So I might wear jeans with a kurti, or I might have chicken, but that's tandoori chicken with some spices in there,
Sure.
right? Like
Yeah.
that is America. Why can't that be America? So
Hmm.
that also made for really good conversation. She's German background, but her family has been here for generations. I think she might be third or fourth generation here. And she said, yeah. And so I said, well, don't you like some of your German heritage, like maybe the foods or the music? And I think I saw a little, light bulb go off, but she didn't overtly admit it. So I said, okay,
Hmm.
that's fine. Um, but that's what it is. Like, how do we create a space so that we do feel safe sharing, right? So that we do
Yeah.
feel comfortable saying, hey, we have to go out into this world and we have to be a certain person. But behind closed doors, it's exhausting. And
Hmm.
can someone just say, I get it,
Hmm.
right? And that's what I crave.
Hmm.
I crave a space where when you and I first spoke and we were both nodding and we were like,
Yes.
yes, yes, I get it. That's what I want. Because when we go out there into the world, they're not open to that yet,
That's right. Yeah.
right? So we need to have our space
Hmm.
where I don't have to pretend to be something, where I can literally just let all of the sit up straight, be the right way. I can just say, put that to the side and say, hey,
Yeah.
this happened to me today. And someone else says, I get it.
Yeah. I so appreciate that. I feel like I'm still looking for that space most
Mm-hmm.
days, particularly in my field of education, not having anyone that looked like me growing up, seeing those adults in the system and working in the system and rarely seeing it. So let me know when you find those places.
Yeah.
I feel like we
Oh, and
all
I'm
need to get on the teleline and tell everyone where it is.
seriously, seriously. And I bet, growing up, so when I think about kind of what my parents wanted me to do, right? Doctor, lawyer, business
Yeah,
person, not teaching,
right.
right? Teaching was not one of the things because you didn't get paid. It wasn't prestigious enough, right? And so I can only imagine how challenging
Hmm.
that field was for you. I'm hoping things are changing a little. I actually know a few higher ed Indian women
Hmm.
teachers, right? And so, at least from the outside looking in, I think the field is changing a little, maybe
Yeah.
slowly. Um, but, knowing that you are there to create some pathway gives me confidence that there will be a time where we feel where we feel comfortable, we feel safe, but we're also being taught, right, by people who look like us,
Right.
who get it, right? That Indian pressure, it's
Yeah.
rough,
Yeah.
right? And so to have a teacher who can say, hey, it's okay, I get it.
Hmm.
Your 98 is a great, awesome grade. Don't worry.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, this is why CAPLE exists, right? CAPLE exists to create more representation in education and also to be very intentional about our youth. And so it's great that we're having that conversation and you're
Mhm.
pointing that out because that's our mission. That's our mission is to
Yeah,
change that trajectory for sure.
it's great.
So with that said, I know we're coming up on the tail end of our time together. Before we get to our fast five, our rapid fire questions, bottom line, are Indians Asian?
There's no bottom line.
Okay.
Technically, yes, but in reality, probably not.
Okay. All right.
I would have a great $1 million answer to that one whenever I get to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we need a part two and part three because there were so many things we touched on that we did not get to dig deeper into. So
Yes,
maybe
I'm there for it.
maybe we'll have another one. Okay. Here's
Absolutely.
our rapid fire questions for you. So this is just to end on kind of a light note, but what was the last show that you binged and loved?
So I watch multiple at a time. So the three that I watched: New Amsterdam. I love medical shows.
Love that.
Marvelous Miss Maisel, Mrs.
Mm.
Maisel, and Sheets Creek.
Okay, I love it. I love it. All right. What is at the top of your bucket list?
Oh gosh, it's parachuting or parasailing.
Ooh, adventure. You're an adventure person.
I I pretend to be. I'm not quite sure if I was at the door of the airplane opens up if I would actually do it, but I want to be that person. But yes.
That's fantastic. Okay, I'm dying to know this. What is your walk up song?
Okay, so I have a rotation. So I have Girl on Fire by Alicia Keys, Confident by Demi Lovato, uh, The Greatest Showman, This Is Me,
Mm,
Love Myself by Haley Steinfeld, and Fighter by Christina Aguilera.
okay,
I have them on
there's
rotation.
fire in all of that, so I get that. I get that from you. Okay,
Thank you.
I love that. Okay, what would people be surprised to know about you?
Oh, that I have traveled more internationally than I have domestically. So I've been to Algeria and Africa. I've been to Bhutan, which is a valley in the Himalayan mountains. I've been to multiple countries in Europe, and of course, India multiple times.
Mhm. Okay, last question. As we encourage ongoing learning about our AAPI community, give us a recommendation of something to read, explore, or watch.
Yep, love this question. I love historical fiction. And one of my favorite historical fictions is a trilogy that's set in Mughal India called The 12th Wife.
Mm,
So The 12th Wife is the first one, Feast of Roses is the second, and Shadow Princess is the third. And it's written by Indu Sundarsan. Indu Sundarsan. Great historical fiction.
okay, I'm on it. I did not hear about that, so I am on it for sure. Suman, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been an extreme pleasure. We did the live, we did the podcast recording, we did all the things. So thank you for being with me. I so appreciate it.
And thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Absolutely. And to everyone, thank you for being here with us. Just a reminder, our conference is coming up. Thank you again for being with us.